Is lefty tighty in Australia in the southern hemisphere?
Like because toilets flush the wrong way, maybe also screw the wrong way?
Yeah, in the southern hemisphere.
Probably.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk, and it's August. You guys know what that means?
That the House model is behind schedule.
Yes.
But actually not. We feel optimistic about it launching soon.
I don't know. I heard mid-July.
My original plan was late June.
Late June was a frickin' fiction. Anyway, it's going to come out sooner than it has in past years. Usually it's after Labor Day. Before Labor Day this year. In fact, perhaps quite soon. But we don't want to overpromise.
Okay. What I was actually going to say is that it means that the July break from the primaries is over. We have 4 primaries tomorrow. We also, maybe more importantly, have a special election in Ohio's 12th congressional district, which is the last special election before the midterms. It's a competitive race, but more importantly, it'll give us a chance to check in on how the parties are performing against their benchmarks just one last time before November. Both Claire and Jody, as you can probably already hear, are out today, but here with me are editor-in-chief Nate Silver. Hey, Nate.
Hey, Galen.
And politics editor Micah Cohen. Hey, Micah.
It's nice to not have such a crowded table, you know.
Spread out, you know. We got masking tape on the table, some phones, Post-it notes.
I don't have to worry about Claire interrupting me all the time.
It's a little gayer than usual. No, sorry.
Majority gay.
This is a majority gay podcast today.
That's true. Listeners, we'll let you guess who the majority is.
Okay. Later on, we're also going to talk about Trump and the media. Trump's attacks on the media are as brutal as ever, so we're going to take a step back, look at the dynamic that the president has created, and ask what the press should do, if anything. But before we get to that, tomorrow is Election Day. As I said, in Ohio's 12th, and also because there are primaries in Missouri, Kansas, Michigan, and Washington. But let's begin with the special election in Ohio. Nate, whoever wins this race is going to represent the district until January. But we still care about this race. So it's been a while since we've had a special. Why do we care?
Do we care? I think our listeners care. I mean, special elections
we both care.
You know what, though?
We all care.
I'm going to, pour some cold water on special elections based on my work on the House model.
Okay.
First of all, it is an example of the sort of district that if Democrats were to win in November would imply a very big November for them. So what's the PVI, the 538 version of PVI?
R plus 14.
So it shows it's 14 points more Republican than the country as a whole. In special elections so far, Democrats have been overperforming by an average of 16 points, I think, which is really, really impressive, right? And so it's potentially another piece of evidence that in these special elections, Democrats are doing super well, and in fact are doing well in districts like Conor Lamb's district and this district in Ohio that, based on polls, I mean, you could maybe say that Baldur's and the Republicans up by 1.5 points or something, but it's very close based on the polling. And so I would say that, as long as it actually is close, within 2 or 3 points either way, I'm not sure that there's that much informational value in whether Democrats win by 1 point or lose by 1 point or whatever else. If it winds up being a blowout, surprisingly, there might be a little bit more. But the reason why I'm a little bit more skeptical about the predictive power of this, it's partly because I've been kind of immersed in building our House model. But at this point in the cycle, we have lots and lots of useful predictive indicators, right? First and foremost, maybe being the polling in individual races, which in general is pretty good for Democrats. Better than, I guess, than the generic ballot is, but also race-by-race factors. You look at fundraising, you look at the quality of candidates, the number of Republican incumbents who retired. The point is, now we kind of have better information than just special elections, which have been, very, very good for Democrats. But for that reason, is it going to change? I mean, literally in our model, we'll not use special election results because at this point in the cycle, August, September, you have better things to look at. So for that reason, it's the data is less useful to me, I guess.
You would know that better than I. The other thing I would say is kind of second order effect. So if this race were taking place, let's say in August of last year, right, you could say, well, 2 or 3 points either way doesn't have much effect in terms of informational value, telling us about the national race. But it might have an effect if the Democrat wins on candidate recruitment, on money raising.
That's right. On the narrative as much as, so we're past that point now. Look, in some ways, it is easier to defend the seat, in this age where incumbents are beleaguered, but it's easier to defend the seat if it's an incumbent. And so probably if O'Connor wins there, he'll be the favorite to retain the seat in November, and likewise if Balderson does. And so it's even if you're cynical about like, hey, look, we have enough information where now, number one, special elections are not the most useful type of information. We have better information. Number two, we have lots of special elections, and so it's not going to affect the average that much, right? It still is a seat that you now get to defend as an incumbent and the advantages that entails. And so, again, if you reduce that Democratic number by 1, what is it now? They need 24 or 23, right?
It's 23.
You would think if I should know this, right?
You should know that, yeah.
Going from 23 to 22 is potentially useful. It's like a extra 5% of the way, 4% of the way that you need. That's not nothing, right, to actually pick up one seat. But we're not in a situation where you're going to have candidate recruitment or retirements affected by this.
What a bummer. We're shitting all over Ohio 12 in special elections.
It's actually a pretty interesting district.
It's really interesting.
So let's actually get into some of those details. Before we go any further on the meaning, Micah, can you just lay out the specifics of the district? Who's running? Yeah.
All right. So Democrat Danny O'Connor is running, Franklin County Recorder. Recorder is always one of my favorite political offices.
Whatever that does.
I don't know what it does. Yeah, he's running against State Senator Troy Balderson, the Republican. They're kind of replacement level Democrats and Republicans. To me, actually more interesting than the candidates is the district itself. It's kind of this affluent suburban district, except it sort of moved. So in most affluent suburban districts and areas across the country, they moved relative to 2012 towards the Democrats, right?
Right.
So Clinton outperformed Obama in those districts, right? This district is slightly the opposite. That is to say, Trump slightly outperformed Romney, which is sort of interesting. You have this kind of, the heart of the district is these wealthy suburbs, and then you have kind of more rural, white working class areas around there. I guess it is like the Pennsylvania 18 district a little bit, yeah.
But did Trump run up his numbers there in different places, meaning Clinton may have done better in some more densely populated areas?
So Delaware County actually shifted a fair bit toward Clinton.
That's the wealthy suburban part of the district.
Whereas everything else shifted quite starkly toward Trump. Or Franklin County also. Okay. So, but anyway, you actually have a district where like you have two tides that are pulling quite strongly in both directions, where the wealthy part of this is exactly like the places where Clinton did the best relative to Obama, and the rest is like literally the places where she did the worst. So a lot of these districts in the Midwest, I'm even thinking a little bit of my district where I grew up in Michigan, right? But you have like either wealthy suburban towns or college towns, right? And even in the Midwest, those became like a bit more blue. But then you have the rest of the Midwest, the rural part of the Midwest, working class part of the Midwest. If it's white, we should be, Detroit is a working class city, did not go for Trump. But that became much, much, much redder. The white working class areas, famously in the Midwest, was kind of what won Trump the election and pulled very strongly toward Republicans. And so you have a bit of a cross current in this district. And you also have a bit of a cross current in other districts in the Midwest in November.
All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about Ohio's 12th and get into the primaries on Tuesday. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring is challenging, but there's one place you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. A place where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. That place is ZipRecruiter.com/538. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards. But they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. With results like that, it's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is the highest rated hiring site in America. And right now, listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. Just go to this web address. It's ZipRecruiter.com/538. That's ZipRecruiter, ZipRecruiter.com/538. It's the numbers. ZipRecruiter.com/538. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we're back, and we're going to wrap up our conversation about the special election in Ohio's 12th district by talking about the polls. We actually have a new poll out today showing, what's the result, Nate?
O'Connor 47, Balderson 46. I did not
want to...
Siren, everyone.
It's so against every bone in my body.
To hype a poll.
To hype an individual poll. It is a poll from Emerson College, who some people critique although they historically have been fairly accurate. But
why do some people critique?
It's a robopoll, I believe, and like they use like some funky adjustments because they know their sample is biased, and so they like are anyway. Methodologically, you would think it's not great, although their polls historically actually do fairly well. So I'm kind of agnostic in Emerson College. But I think what's more important is that there are two broad conclusions we can draw. Number one, the race is close. I think we can certainly say that. And number two, the race has been trending toward O'Connor. And it looks like what's happened is that consistently Balderson, the Republican, his numbers have been in the mid to high 40s. As undecided voters have decided, and or as people look at who's actually turning out in the district, O'Connor has gained to now where it's basically a tie. I don't think there's like, I'm copying what Patrick Ruffini, one of our friends of 538, said on Twitter, right? It's not really going to help anyone to like go out on a limb and say, oh, I think this is actually going to go for O'Connor or Balderson, whatever else.
Wait a second.
Right?
O'Connor has momentum, Nate. He's been closing in the polls and therefore will continue to close through Election Day and win.
I mean, so again, one of the things actually doing work now, looking at House models, would say that you don't want to get too carried away with looking at momentum. What you'd rather have is a variety of polls, of recent-ish polls. And so, you know, Monmouth University, which is a very good pollster, had Balderson up 2. The fact that that poll is 5 days earlier than the Emerson College poll, but it's a frankly better poll, you know. Anyway, the point is that, like, it's
close. The
close.
fact that it's 5 days earlier shouldn't make that much of a difference to us.
Yeah, if we were using the 530 algorithm on this, then it would say, you know what, we're not going to go too far out on a limb to emphasize the Emerson College poll, right? Just because it happens to be most recent, that we'd rather look at this more highly rated Monmouth poll, you know, this public policy polling poll, which ordinarily has good results for Democrats, but didn't particularly this time, you know. So, like, I think people can get, like, a little bit carried away looking for momentum or looking for trends. If you have lots and lots of polls, it's one thing. But anyway,
I'm insulted, by the way, that Nate didn't clearly recognize that I was
trolling him
with the momentum thing and thought I was genuinely
I did
asking.
know you were. I did know you, but like I thought you were. It was a setup. I thought it was a layup.
It was
right?
a layup.
All
yes,
right. As we look at the returns on Tuesday night, because there are the two kind of strains in this district of the wealthier suburbs and the more rural white working class areas, what are you going to be watching for in those returns? I mean, do you have any kind of prediction about how O'Connor versus Balderson does along that divide?
Neither Nate or I have a prediction, but Nathaniel Rakich, 538 writer, has a preview that'll go up first thing tomorrow morning before all you kids are awake. And it'll have benchmarks for each county. Here's the trick, though, back to what we were saying earlier about how in one part of the county, Trump outperformed Romney, and in another part of the county, Clinton outperformed Obama. We're not sure sort of what the geographical pattern of the vote will be. So it makes it really hard to set benchmarks when you're following the return. So Nathaniel actually, when he filed his piece, he used two benchmarks, 2012 and 2016.
And this is the big question, right, of the midterms. What
2012 or 2016, which is the baseline?
Well, there's like three things that will make interpretation very hard. One of which is that all these districts shifted a lot from 2012 to 2016, although in opposite directions in different counties. That's confusing thing number one. Confusing number two is that, like, you may see very differential turnout also, and so it could be that O'Connor is not quite hitting his benchmarks. However, there's a big turnout surge in the Democratic areas and not the Republican areas. And so looking just at margins and not at turnout, because of how bifurcated this district is, it's important not to just focus on that without ignoring kind of where do you have more voters turning out. The third complication, also sort of turnout related, is that there's going to be an early vote in this district, which by all indications is going to be very strong for O'Connor. And so people who have spent more time studying the details of this race than I have will say, you know, he could be up by 30 or even 40 points in the early vote count. And if the GOP gets a strong election day count, that doesn't necessarily mean he's safe. So I do think there's like a high propensity for screw-ups and kind of people making extrapolations tomorrow night, because those three factors working in tandem are pretty tricky to like pin this down. With that said, it's the big show in tomorrow night, so by tomorrow night we'll have much expertise on the subtleties of
and you can
every nook and cranny of this district.
Just watch our live blog so you don't make a mistake. But also in Nathaniel's preview, just to point out, we do have these various benchmarks you can use, and also the share of the overall vote each county makes up. So to Nate's point, in 2016, Franklin County, which is the most Democratic part of the district, made up about a third of the vote share. If we start seeing the vote come in tomorrow night and Franklin County is making up, 40% of the vote share, that could be telling. Even if O'Connor isn't running ahead of his benchmarks everywhere, if Franklin County kind of balloons as part of the district's vote, that could be another way he could win.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for Ohio's 12th.
And special elections generally. Are we saying goodbye to the special election mania part of the 2018 midterms?
Well, yeah, as Nate said, we have better data now, which I guess we will elaborate on what that better data is as we head into November. Next week, actually. Is that a hint that the model might be coming out next week? Okay,
no comment.
No comment.
It does feel.
By the way, we don't know. We don't know what the model, because the way
the
you
model will
design
just come out when it wants to.
The way you design a model is you build the model based on past data without looking at what it's going to say for the current data.
Yeah,
so I don't
Nate
know.
doesn't know what the model will show.
Yeah. But no, we think it's cool. There's going to be, as was the case in 2016, there are going to be different versions of the model. They will not be called...
No nowcast.
No nowcast.
I won that battle.
All right, no more previews. Do you remember that one night where the Nowcast showed a 66.6% chance that Hillary Clinton would win? And I was like, the Nowcast is showing its true colors, 666.
I remember
Trump winning in the Nowcast.
Trump was ahead in the Nowcast. I remember trolling Democrats with the Nowcast.
The Nowcast made an appearance outside the DNC convention in Philadelphia.
Oh, that's right.
There was a Bernie supporter with a sign showing the Nowcast showing Trump winning, and he said, if they nominate Hillary Clinton, Trump will win.
And the election were held today.
Yeah. If the election were held today.
Yeah, we've got rid of the Nowcast because people just take it as a forecast.
Because Micah was right.
All right, we'll leave it there. So
I do feel like we're breaking up a little bit with special elections, though. It's like
it's been real.
I'm sorry, it's been very informative and valuable, but we have found better data.
It's also been, it's been kind of fun. We've had those late nights to remind us of what elections are all about.
I do want to say, and again, having not had the privilege of knowing what the model will say, people contrast like special elections against generic ballot. You could also say about the generic ballot, or I might say that the generic ballot at this point, although it is actually quite useful, is far from the only thing that you should be looking at this point.
Are you breaking up with the generic ballot too?
I'm not. The generic ballot is useful.
Oh no, this is a bridge too far.
But the generic ballot is like, of all the things you want to look at, it's like a quarter of it or a fifth of it, or you know what I mean?
Nate has a polyamorous relationship with election data.
Plus the generic ballot, it's kind of weird. Like, what's it actually predicting? Is it the House popular vote per se?
Would you swipe left or swipe right on the generic ballot?
I'd still go out with the generic ballot.
You'd still swipe right with the generic ballot. Okay, caveat here. We've got to talk a little bit about the primaries. You guys, I know you're not super excited about the primaries. We're breaking up with special elections, but you're already kind of sick of the primaries.
Nate was always sick of the primaries, sadly.
But we also don't just have primaries tomorrow. We also have Proposition A in Missouri. Hey.
Yay.
Right to work legislation on the ballot as an initiative.
As an initiative, the vote is technically on whether to adopt Senate Bill 19, so a yes is for right to work. So far, it looks like, I think the most recent poll had it failing, so right to work failing in Missouri, which is kind of interesting.
The polling didn't even look close, yeah.
Yeah, which polling in the primary electorate on a ballot initiative, let's be careful here. But like, if this right to work measure fails in Missouri, I think that's interesting for kind of where that issue is nationally. And I think there will be a lot of people looking to that. The only other really interesting thing in Missouri, I think, is the Senate race. But we kind of know Josh Hawley, the Republican, is likely to win and face Claire McCaskill in the fall. But that race, the general election of that race, Missouri Senate, is such an important one that it's still kind of worth watching.
Let's maybe touch on Kansas before we say goodbye to the primary segment, which, you guys can disagree. I found it kind of interesting just because it seems like Democrats are preparing to play offense a bit in Kansas in the fall in terms of the governor's race, in terms of 2 congressional races there. And I mean, Kansas is pretty Republican.
Kansas is pretty Republican, but it just had this like kind of disastrous Republican governor experience.
By the name of Sam Brownback, who is now the global ambassador for religious freedom, I think.
Oh, I didn't see that. That's a good title, though. And 2, they are going after 2 congressional districts. One is really Republican. Kansas's 2nd district is R plus 20 according to our measure. So that would take a Democratic tsunami to win. But the other one, the 3rd district, is just R plus 4. So, like, that's easily winnable.
I mean, actually, Kansas is interesting in that, unlike almost everywhere else in the working class Midwest, working class white Midwest, Trump actually did notably worse than Mitt Romney. So Romney got 59.7% of the vote in 2012. Trump got 56.6, still be Clinton by 20 points. But there is like some sign of like an anti-Republican backlash relative to Kansas, which means it's it's not like blood red. It's just still very, nice shade of crimson or something still. But there are a couple of districts in the eastern part of Kansas that could be competitive in the House this year. The gubernatorial race looks quite competitive. I think Trump weighed in on that race as we were taping this.
Did he? What did he say?
He endorsed Kobach. It's Kobach or Kobach.
Kobach? Chris Kobach?
Well, so that's the interesting thing is governor of Kansas, Jeff Coyler, is running for his first full term. He was appointed, right? But he's being challenged in the Republican primary by Chris Kobach. And it's this weird situation where, how do we describe Chris Kobach? He's like this, look, I'm not going to be polite. He's like this loony conspiracy theorist on voter fraud.
A true believer, you could say.
In what?
In that there's this massive conspiracy of covering up massive voter fraud that just doesn't exist. And Trump appointed him to run this election integrity commission and blah, 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 blah. But he's like, it's this weird scenario where the challenger to an incumbent governor, appointed, but incumbent governor, has this national profile, right? And according to Nate, Trump just endorsed him.
Yeah, he did. And that's makes that, first of all, that endorsement could be persuasive. Trump actually has had a lot of influence on Republican primary elections. And second of all, that definitely makes the seat quite competitive.
If he were to win the nomination.
Wins.
Yeah, that would put that race on the radar. The Democratic nominee is expected to be a woman named Laura Kelly. I think most of the forecasters would probably characterize as a toss-up if Kobach were the nominee. Kobach.
Yeah, mid-July poll had Coyler leading Kelly, that the Democrat Nate just mentioned, by 10 points, but Kobach trailing Kelly by 1 point.
With a lot of undecided voters. So but that would be an interesting race, and the kind of race where like a little bit off the beaten path that a party can win in wave elections, a little bit of a backlash against against Brownback, plus a kind of problematic, shall we say, Republican candidate. The independent, I think, actually, Orman, who is left-leaning-ish, could actually hurt the Democrat in that race potentially. But that could be kind of one of these like main-style three-way races where you have interesting dynamics. And so if you're rooting for having more competitive elections, then you should be rooting for Chris Kobach tomorrow night, because he would make that race, I think, a lot more interesting.
All right. Well, let's leave it there with the primaries. Do you have anything to say about your home state of Michigan before we leave this segment?
It's probably the best state.
There are a bunch of interesting races there, but there's like too many to get into, kind of.
All right. Well, if you really want to get into the details, of course, you
check
can
the site.
Follow along on the live blog on Tuesday night. What time does the live blog begin?
It'll be like 7:30ish.
Not a moment too soon.
Not a moment too soon.
No, but you can even
check
the
live blog
site.
will happen when it wants to happen.
Check the site before then. Nathaniel's preview will be up by the time you hear this.
Okay, enough about elections. Let's talk about ourselves, the media, and Trump's relationship with the media.
I mean, I'm only part of the media when I feel like being the media,
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense.
I think we should talk about this.
No, we are.
Whether or not we're the media?
We work for ABC News, which is a part of the Walt Disney Company, whose market capitalization is, I don't even want to think about it, but like we're part of the
and
media.
ABC was included in the parentheses when he named the fake news the enemy of the people. I think it might have been the first time.
But I don't feel, why does this segment not feel navel-gazy to me?
Okay, well, we're not in this segment yet because I actually have to read an ad before we get to it. Okay, so we're going to talk about us, whether or not we're the enemy of the people. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by SeatGeek. Buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there's a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. SeatGeek is by far the easiest way to shop for tickets. You can be anywhere, and with just a few taps on your phone app, you can instantly find seats. SeatGeek saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. And to get you the most bang for your buck, SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theater. Best of all, listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code 538 today. That's promo code 538 for just $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Today's podcast is also brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring used to be hard. Multiple job sites, stacks of resumes, a confusing review process. But today, hiring can be easy, and you only have to go to one place to get it done. ZipRecruiter.com/538. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. With results like that, it's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is the highest rated hiring site in America. And right now, listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/538. That's ZipRecruiter.com/ just the numbers 538. ZipRecruiter.com/538. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we're back. President Trump's attacks on the press are a theme of his presidency, and in recent weeks, they've reached a new level. The White House barred a CNN reporter from an event open to the press. Trump again described the news media he deems to be, quote, fake news as the enemy of the people. On Sunday, this past Sunday, he said, quote, they purposely cause great division and distrust. They can also cause war. They are very dangerous and sick, end quote. Videos over the past week showed crowds jeering and cussing at the press at rallies. Various people in the press have expressed concern about the attacks on the press leading to violence. Okay, so just to begin, Nate, what's your reaction to where the rhetoric is right now?
I mean, I think it's pretty dangerous. You know, you've already had one shooting in a newsroom that apparently did not have as much to do with Trump, but, you know, certainly during Trump's rallies when he began to use violent rhetoric, you had outbreaks of violence. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is kind of, isn't it obvious? It's kind of totally inappropriate and dangerous. You know, I mean, I guess what I try to leaven that with is, like, I am a little bit afraid of the navel-gazing aspect where, like, Trump is threatening to lots of people and lots of groups, and I'm not sure that journalists ought to be put up on a pedestal. And there's also an element where the White House will troll journalists as a way to distract attention from other stories. You know, again, I do think sometimes people are like, oh, X is a distraction from Y, and Y is a distraction from Z, and Z is a distraction from X. Like, I feel like people sometimes overrate that a little bit. I do know that, like, with respect to the media, Trump can use that as a story to get people all up in arms and very upset.
And that he can create a distraction just by calling the press the enemy of the people or something like that.
To me, it's the kind of implication that these people are sick and they can cause war. I mean, to me, that seems to be like potentially at least a tacit approval of, like, anything goes with these people potentially, and that's, you know, a little scary.
I agree with all that. It's incredibly dangerous. And look, like, we're biased. We're members of the press. I assume we all join journalism because we kind of believe in the principles and the values of reporting and journalism. The whole thing does make me a little bit unsettled in the sense of I have, like, deep criticism of the media. And I think in particular the political media is, like, fundamentally broken. But it's not at all in the way that Trump describes. So it's every time Trump comes after the media, I always have this sort of weird reaction of, like, no, that's, like, totally wrong. But then what do I do with the feeling that the media does have these kind of big problems, right?
Yeah, when I look at polling on how the public views the press over the past decade or over the past 20 years, looking at Gallup, and you see, well, some decline in how the public views the press. I'm like, well, you know, my faith in the press has also declined. So if I was answering that poll, I would probably agree. But would it be based on what Trump has said about the press? No.
Exactly. Yeah, and faith in the press and trust in the press was declining long before Trump, right?
Right.
He's probably kind of catalyzed that decline, particularly among Republicans. Although maybe you've seen a little sort of counter movement among Democrats.
Yeah, the Democrats have more trust in the press than they did 2 years ago. I would argue maybe they shouldn't, but like that's a complicated story. But no, it is essential to point out that like this trend of Republican politicians demonizing the press. People remember Newt Gingrich at the debates, and like people remember 2012,
Forget
right?
Him. Spiro Agnew in like the 70s was 60s and 70s was attacking the press.
So in some sense, this is not anything new, and directionally, it's consistent with where the GOP's been going for a long time. And out of all the polling questions where people have really big partisan splits, like there's almost no bigger split than the one about how do you feel about the media, where even some never Trump Republicans don't trust kind of the liberal quote unquote media. So Trump, I think, uses that more effectively than some other issues with which to like rally his base, actually maybe less divisive than immigration policy. For example, the proposition that the leftist media is out to like undermine Republicans and is biased and unfair and everything else. So, but Trump has certainly catalyzed and accelerated that. I think people were shocked when like Sarah Huckabee Sanders refused to like repudiate the idea that like the press the enemy of the people. Well, you know what? Good for Sarah Huckabee Sanders, because that's what the president said and has said repeatedly. And if she has like a nice ass-kissy relationship with the White House press room, then in some ways that covers up the very dangerous rhetoric that the president is using. And so I guess you could say like they're kind of speaking the quiet part loud now. I think one could debate, does Trump really think that, or is he using that because he knows it'll inflame Democrats and inflame the media? I mean, I don't know. There certainly has been an increase in inflammatory rhetoric by Trump recently. People actually charted this and look at the number of like anger words that are used in tweets. And yeah, it's always been bad. It's been especially bad in the last month or two. It does seem to me like, Micah, let me know if you disagree. I do feel like in the past 6 weeks or so, right, there's been momentum and pressure around the Russia story and the collusion story in the ways that there weren't before. And so I do think this is kind of like, I think we're not in that phase we've had many times before in the White House where it's just kind of ebb and flow. This feels like it's definitely like a flow toward some type of crisis point. It wouldn't shock me if Trump's rhetoric about the media gets worse. At the same time, he like often threatens Iran or North Korea or Canada or whatever else, and then kind of pulls back when he's in a better mood, I suppose. And so it's a little bit like, do you take this literally or what's the stupid freaking phrase?
Seriously or literally? Literally, but not seriously, something.
So maybe you should take it seriously, but not literally. There's an argument for that. But still, like, I think it's crossed the line. And even though I probably like Micah, like when people, everyone on Twitter's like, oh my God, this is so awful. There is like a contrarian part of me that thinks a little bit self-aggrandizing, number one. And number two, thinks that like there are these things media should think about a little bit more, although they have very little to do with the kind of Trump critique of it. But despite that, I think I have to speak in solidarity with other people who are journalists and say, like, this is an essential part of American democracy. It's an essential part of having a free country. And it's very dangerous when the president says stuff like this.
I know that we do not like to necessarily approach things that the president does as, is this part of a grand strategy, et cetera, et cetera. But Micah, do you see the attacks on the press as an actual part of a strategy?
Yes. I think the attacks on the press are the one exception or the main exception to the kind of like...
he's not playing 3D chess.
Yeah, he's not playing 3D chess sort of prior that we have here. I think the attacks on the press are the exception to that. I also mostly agree with Nate that the right reaction, even among those of us who have issues with the press, is sort of like, well, these attacks are so over the top and so wrong, like factually wrong, that you sort of just, you stand on the other side of them. But what's the like, forget Trump for a second, what's the generous version of Trump's point of view? What's like the For example, I do. So Trump says, "Oh, it's all fake news. These people are just trying to bring me down. They only want to tell negative stories." I don't think that's true. Do I think most people in the media didn't vote for Trump? I think that's true. And so the how you reconcile those two things, I am sympathetic to people who don't think about this stuff that much, who just think, oh, yeah, most of these people voted for Clinton. Of course they want to bring Trump down.
Well, I think some people would say that, like, the notion of objectivity as defined by the media and kind of the paradigm that was in place from 1950 circa to 2000 or so has failed. And the fact that 40% of people just don't believe anything the mainstream media says, although that's a little debatable, right? They might not say it, but still they watch the news and then they soak it in and they kind of probably have priors to assume it's true until someone like President Trump disputes it. But the fact that like 40% of the population thinks the media is totally in the tank for Democrats perhaps suggests that like this notion of objectivity is outdated and has failed, and that a notion of more transparency, because it is a problem that like, or maybe it's not a problem. It's a relevant point of context that very few people in media organizations would have voted for Trump if they voted. A lot of people in media won't vote, right? But very few of them would vote for Trump. Relatively few of them, I would say, their best friend voted for Trump. You know, frankly, as you see local papers decline and it becomes more important what the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times and the Boston Globe say, you know, papers become more concentrated in very, very blue urban areas. You know, historically, political journalism has not been the most diverse. That's improving somewhat, but not that much. But there's all types of potentially like short-sighted, potentially biasing factors you would have. They're becoming worse, I think, as kind of the professional classes and the highly educated classes become more democratic, or at least more liberal, and also as the credentials for becoming a journalist get higher and higher. It's kind of now a trade that requires a lot of expertise. Certainly the type that 538 practices, frankly, is probably on the higher end of the needing training before you begin the job part of the spectrum. So we're, I guess, a part of that, for better or for worse. But to say that, like, okay, we don't have to worry about whether or not our coverage is slanted, despite 90% of the newsroom being Democrats and writing for an audience. It's probably 80% Democrat if you're at the New York Times or the Washington Post, or I don't know, 538 may be similar, right? To say, like, we don't have to be concerned about that. We can just keep doing things the same way and not worry about it. That seems problematic, potentially. And so, you know, kind of understanding that, like, transparency is probably the real objectivity. I wouldn't even say transparency replaces objectivity. I would say, like, if you're transparent, you usually kind of wind up being closer to being objective in, like, a scientific definition of that term.
Yeah. Well, also, like, transparency frees you up to admit what you don't know, which is very useful in reporting, because reporters don't know a lot. So, like, let's, like, to bring this all the way down to, like, a very personal level, right? There have been a few times where 538 itself has become part of the news, right? Reports about 538 during those times were, like, wildly inaccurate, right? That can't be a coincidence, or I doubt very much that it just so happens that the one time we here have been on the other end of the press's camera, so to speak. There was no literal camera, but you get the idea. The experience was sort of deeply unpleasant and, like, factually wrong and blah, 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 right? So I think that's a lot of people's experience with the media, and the media gets a lot wrong. You know, when you're trying to not only be objective, but, like, what's the term that people use, like the voice from nowhere? You know,
yeah,
it's like the voice of God, which is like it's not only are you objective, but you, like, know everything, right? And I have the inside scoop, right, on what's happening. Then it's very easy to just get out over your skis and make mistakes. And, you know, it's like we have a hard enough time here not making mistakes, and we have set up a newsroom where we have removed a lot of the incentives that lead to mistakes. And even without those incentives, we still make a ton of mistakes, right? So it's, you know.
All right. I want to get to a question. You referenced Jim Acosta's exchange with Sarah Huckabee Sanders during a White House press briefing, in which he asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders if she would say that the press is not the enemy of the people. And that got us thinking as an office on Slack, and I know Perry weighed in on this as well, about how should the news media respond? Should the news media respond when the president says we're the enemy of the people? I mean, is it productive to get in an argument with the administration about whether or not we're the enemy of the people? Does that just further his talking points? Do we gain something by that? Or is there a different way that we should engage on the topic?
I'll put it like this. You don't want to make yourselves the story, right?
Nate counseling a conservative keep your head down approach.
But no, first of all, we will fight the back if people are like unfair. Like one thing I've learned in life, and this is an advice if you're, an aspiring whatever, right? Don't be deferential to people who are clearly arguing in bad faith. Call them out, fight, go dirty to fight back against them, right? But don't give people who are arguing in bad faith or who are too lazy to actually care about the facts.
That applies in this case.
That's what I'm saying.
So you think the media should come back guns blazing, fight dirty?
No, I think the media. Let me be careful. I think when they go low, you can go low sometimes. Is what I'm saying, okay. Right? But I'm saying you have whatever range of options are best for you strategically. But once someone is going low, right, then my goal is to kick their ass however I can best kick their ass, right? If they're going high, or if I'm not sure which way they're going, then I will try and be polite and deferential. But if someone's going low, and they're in a street fight, I also might decide the street fight's not worth my time because I have better things to do.
Okay.
Don't waste my time for a lot of kind of trollish arguments. But don't treat trolls with respect.
But what should the media do?
Okay, so let's frame
part
it
of a strategy to troll them.
If the media wants to, win the argument, so to say, and prove to the country that it's an important part of our democracy, it's all the things that we say it is, part of the First Amendment, then what do we do? What's the answer? And not in abstract terms, get dirty, win the fight. I mean, what do we do?
I think the answer is to let people know that this is not healthy and not normal, and then go back and cover all the other stories, which there's not enough time to cover during the Trump administration. I mean, this is like I was saying before, you have the right to pick your strategy when you're being trolled. That strategy sometimes can be to disengage, and I think Trump very often uses, like Micah said, attacks in the media as a way to distract from. I mean, there is a lot that's going on in the White House right now. And a lot of what we know about what's going on in the White House, Scott Pruitt left because of investigative reporting in Politico and other organizations.
Right.
Obviously, in the Russia investigations, you would have to give a lot of credit to Mueller, and that is an area where maybe the kind of actually rare exception, I think, where
but in the
where
beginning,
most of the stories of
in the beginning, part of the reason he was appointed is because of
in the
reporting.
If we ignore the fact that the media totally screwed the pooch on the Russia story, or at least certain news organizations did during the 2016 campaign, right? I mean, certainly moving the needle very far on Russia ever since then. I mean, think about Roy Moore.
Okay.
And the great job the Washington Post did on that. So, the point is, the media has a lot of influence, and it has a lot of influence by doing its job really well. And so not allowing yourself to get too distracted from that, but also not engaging with an argument that's made in bad faith as though it's made in good faith.
So I think that's where I come down, is just in terms of keep your head down, do the work you're supposed to do it really well. I don't think that's enough. I think the media has to I think the media has to do a better job of doing its work. Two, I think the media has to become more transparent. Part of 538's success, I think, is that we treat the reader as an equal. We kind of pull down the curtain a bit and, kind of let you inside our newsroom. That goes a long ways in establishing trust. And then when you do mess up, you can say to the reader, here's how I messed up, here's what happened, and it's not some grand conspiracy, right? The other thing is, yes, trust in the news media has declined, but it's not all the way gone, and it kind of depends how I was looking at the polling data before we were recording this. Quinnipiac asked in May of last year, how important is it to you that the news media holds public officials accountable, right? That's basic job of the press, right? Very important, somewhat important, not so important, or not important at all. Overall, 66% of people said very important, 20% said somewhat important. That's a huge majority, right? So on the important side, that's 86%. Among Republicans, so this is the group in the Trump era who you would think would be most anti-press, right? 39% very important, 30% somewhat important. In other words, a chunk of Republicans have kind of gone into the somewhat important column. They haven't gone into the not so important column, right? And a majority still think the press's job of holding public officials accountable is important. So I don't know. It's not like the media has lost this war, but I think keep your head down, do a better job, be more transparent and honest with your reader or viewer about kind of what you know and what you don't know. That kind of simple stuff goes a long ways.
All right. Should we leave it there? Final words?
Yeah, and as a listener, then I do endorse subscribing to your local online or digital publication. We're not a subscription-based service. We would tell you to do the same thing.
Just send us money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
let me go one up. I think in general, if you're a listener or reader, you probably have a more positive impact by subscribing to a high-quality local newspaper than by donating to your local candidate.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, all those million people who have fundraising pitches are like, 538 says a race is a toss-up,
Now we'll send
538 says, take that money you're going to donate, and if you're not subscribing to, if it's a high quality, not a trunk. So first of all, if you subscribe to a trunk newspaper, unsubscribe from that shit. If it's a non-trunk newspaper and it's halfway decent in your local area, then to subscribe to that. Once you do that, then you can donate to whichever candidates that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I got my start working for a Wisconsin-based media organization. And first of all, it was a great experience. And also, the closer you are to the people that you're reporting on, I think the easier it can be to gain trust. And so if local news goes away, it's harder to, those local news sources are some of the more trusted news sources. So it's harder to reinvigorate that trust in the media if we're not there.
I started at the New York Times.
Oh, hoity-toity. Well, don't talk to me. Anyway, that's a wrap, you guys. Thank you so much, Nate.
Thank you, Galen.
Thank you, Micah.
My pleasure, as always. Why does my voice get gravelly? My pleasure, Galen. It's been a real treat. 3-person pod.
All right. My name is Galen Druk. Tony Chow is in the control room. You can get in touch by emailing us at podcasts@538.com. You can also, of course, tweet at us with questions or comments. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a rating or a review in the Apple Podcast Store. Also, subscribe to your local paper. When you leave a rating for us, it helps our rankings, which helps others discover the show. Or just tell someone about the show. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you soon.